righty. Hello, students in gentleness practice. It is I, Professor Coleman, and wanted to take some time today to really walk through this frozen river competency assignment that you have coming up due on October 16th. You're probably wondering why I'm starting so early with just kind of talking about this assignment because this assignment is a lot of work that you will need to do. And it's not one of those types of assignments where you'll be able to start a week ahead of time and actually get finished with a quality product. So I really wanted to take some time and be very deliberate and walk through the entire assignment, what the expectations are, talk about some of the other things that need to happen as it relates to this particular assignment, what it is, the best things that you can do in terms of being able to move forward with getting it done in the proper way. All right, so first of all, what we have is there is a movie that you will be required to watch. I'm going to take this particular hyperlink and put it in a Word document, and I will post it in the course shell on the landing page so that you can actually kind of take a look and see a little bit about what the movie is going to entail. But Frozen River is a dramatic series that occurred back in 2008. Um, Now, you are going to have to figure out how to get access to this movie. So they're fairly easy to rent. This is an older movie that came out in 2008. You can stream it for those of you who are utilizing streaming services, download it or purchase it. But you're going to need to do this prior to actually starting your paper. So here's what I suggest, because in past cohorts, we have watched this particular movie in class, and folks have found out that they really needed to watch it a second time. So the first time I would just encourage, it's about an hour and 37 minutes long, but just to watch it for the entertainment value. It's a pretty good story. It's a really good drama, um, and it has a nice storyline, and it's pretty riveting. So you can really get absorbed in the movie pretty easy. So the first time, make yourself available and just get absorbed in the movie. Second time you watch it, what I would suggest is that you then pull out your assignment questions and then start to identify these particular concepts they're going to be asking about in your paper. Because in the movie, you will find the evidence of the things that you will need to actually be able to demonstrate that you understand as it relates to concepts that are coming up with the assignment questions. Right? So rent the movie, download it. If you guys want to get together and do it as a group, that might be fun as well. But that's going to be very important for you all to do prior to even starting this assignment. So now, a lot of times let's talk about audience for a moment. So oftentimes when people write scholarly papers, and for many of you, this will be your first extensive APA scholarly paper that you've written in the seventh edition. So it is no small undertaking. So when you think about your audience, most people would automatically assume that, well, my audience is my professor who's giving me the assignment, and that's actually not accurate. So in order to do a quality, thorough, well-written scholarly research paper, you need to write it as though your audience has no clue about what a micro or meso or macro system is. So start from that particular point that, for those of you who have significant others, or if you've got older kids, teenagers, adults, who may not be familiar with any of these concepts, you should write your paper with enough clarity for them to be able to pick up the paper, read it, come away with a fairly good comprehensive understanding of all of these different systems, and be able to find out where all the information came from on your reference page. So if you can do that, that will be that's kind of the beginnings of an A paper. So making sure that your audience is not your professor, your audience is the unknown. So people who have no idea of what you might be even talking about. So when you're thinking about that audience, then if they don't know about the particular concepts that we're talking about, then you're going to have to be able to define what those concepts are, and then show examples. So, for example, there are questions that talks about strengths that particular individuals or families have. who knows what a strength is? So you may want to look in your text or look at some of the video lectures, define what is meant by strength when you think about it in terms of working with families, and then say, here are examples of strengths that I observed with this particular character or in this particular family, and then go to a portion of the movie where you believe that a value or a strength was demonstrated, and then write about that, and then cite the movie immediately after. Same thing with barriers. So as you're thinking about the questions that are going to be posed to you, and there'll be several of them, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, then you also want to use the movie as the place to discover where you learn about those particular concepts, where you saw examples of them. And your textbook also will be helpful for you, as well as the text readings and the video lectures that you have had up until this particular point. So there's going to be an expectation that you um, go back and take a look at those. So again, audience is not me. The audience is the unknown. So anybody should be able to pick up your well-written paper and read it and have a pretty good sense of what a microsystem is, what it looks like in the course of this particular film. All right. So think about it from that standpoint. All right. And the other thing I think it's really important for you to understand is this is what's called a learning integration assignment. So that means that literally all of the text reading, the video lectures, uh, various articles or things that you have read have given you information about systems. So you've learned about microsystems, mesosystems, and macro systems, right? And so what you're going to need to be able to do is, as you are writing this particular paper or answering the questions to write this paper, you're going to need to draw from all of those particular sources. So again, you're going to need to pull when it asks particular questions about various things, and you're going to need to pull examples from your textbooks, and you're going to need to be able to cite them. If there are things that I shared with you in a video lecture, then you're going to be able to cite that information and talk about where that came from. And then you're going to have to put that in your paper. So the reason that this is a fairly complex assignment is because you're going to have to go back. In addition to looking at the movie, looking at the questions, you're going to have to pull information from all of these different sources that you have learned about them from and utilize them in your paper. So that's what I'll be looking for in your paper, because again, it goes to that whole piece around audience. All the information in your paper either originates from you or an outside source. And that sounds like a really weird thing to say. But the reality is when I start to grade papers, as I'm reading, the first thing that I'm thinking about is, whose information is this? So I see that the student has put this wonderful information about an interviewing technique that they're going to use in terms of working with the family. But I need to know where it came from. Is it their own original thought, or was it something that they learned about in the course or in a textbook? And if it's something that was learned about in a textbook, then you need to be able to cite that source via APA. Okay. Um, the other information then comes from you. So, for example, if there are parts of the paper that ask about your perspective or your opinion on what you would do or how you would do something, then that's information that's coming from you. You are the person who owns and originates those thoughts and those particular ideas. And so, as you can see, um, as I've got in bullet 4, when the assignment asks for your perspective, you should start your statement by saying, in the opinion of this writer, or this writer believes. And that's my cue to say, oh, it's the student that's talking now about their own perspective. So there won't be any confusion about whether this is information that came from somewhere else, because it's coming directly from you. All outside sources must be cited in the paper when they are used and must be included on the final reference page. So when you're looking at various attributes of micro, meso systems, when you're looking at things that you saw within the family or things that happened in the movie or the things that are happening in the community for a macro system, then you're going to need to be able to cite the source of that. So originally or initially, you're going to definitely be citing the movie quite a bit, because most of the information that's going to be in your paper is coming from the movie. It's stuff that you learn from the movie. But then you're also wanting to tie in from these other resources in terms of the integrated learning as well. But then you need to be able to cite those as you're moving forward. Um, Resist the temptation to offer your personal opinion unless the question directly asks for it. I've had many papers that were way, way, way too long. And people would say, well, this is how I feel about it, and this is what's going on, and this character shouldn't have done this. And it's like, none of that matters because that doesn't speak to what the assignment questions are actually asking. So I really want you to stay focused on what it is the assignment questions are asking and really stick to answering those questions. Do not repeat and tell the movie. That's not what we're asking you to do here. We're asking you to pull information out of the movie and share it as it relates to micro, meso, and macro perspectives. So it's a little bit different in terms of a paper because we're not talking a whole lot about things that they're going to be asking you in terms of your professional reflection. So, but citing that information is going to be critically important for this paper to be successful. All right. So now, as I read through and graded many of, well, all of your this I believe assignments, I started to notice that there were some pretty common writing areas that errors that were happening for lots of people. The thing that I saw probably most of all were comma splices and run-on sentences. There were some papers that had very poor sentence structure and overuse of commas. You know, if you're writing a sentence and at the end of the sentence you go back and read it and you got 3, 4, 5 commas, that's a problem. You have more than likely what we call a comma splice. And I'll catch that and we'll mark that up and you'll have to go back and you'll have to fix that. Um, when you're attempting to cover in one sentence, one concept, or you're more than one concept. So if you're talking about a character who has shown the strength of being a good family member and being loyal, and then they also are really good in school, and then they also are really helpful around the house in terms of being able to take care of different things. And they're, you see where I'm going here? So all of those ands contribute to what we call a comma splice. So a good rule of thumb is to really try to stick to no more than one, two at the most concepts in one particular sentence, and then move on to the next sentence. If there's other things that you need to share, then you can start that in a separate sentence. But if you try to fuse all of those together in one long sentence, it's going to be wrong. My rule of thumb for you is simply this: is that if you've when you're doing your paper and you notice you have a sentence that starts and then 4 lines later that sentence is still happening, that's going to be a run-on sentence. So chances are you have tried to do too many things in that one particular sentence, and it's much better if you go back and break it up. And we'll talk a little bit about how to fix those comma splices in the next couple of slides. Um, Infrequent in-text citations. I would say to you, probably the rule of thumb might be to look at if you're writing a paper and if you've got 2 or 3 long paragraphs and you only have one citation, you don't have enough citation. Because that means as I'm reading the paper, I'm asking myself, I don't know where all of this information comes from. And if you end it and put it at the end, the in-text citation at the end of the paragraph, that doesn't help because it's kind of like, well, is this in-text citation for the sentences that came right before the citation? Or is it for the whole paragraph? And so one way just to make sure that you don't fall into a situation where you're looking like you're plagiarizing is just, I would say, every 3 to 4 lines when you're pulling information from another source, just cite that source. If it's the movie, cite the movie. If it's your textbook, cite the textbook. If it's a video lecture, cite the video lecture. But whatever it is, make sure that you cite it so I'll know that I know where it comes from. So in a paragraph, you'll probably have multiple occasions where you'll be citing from the movie and from the text and other sources, all at, pretty repeatedly. So just make sure you do that. So I'll get a sense of never having to worry about like I'm not sure what this is coming from. The failure to do that is called plagiarism. So that's basically taking someone else's information and passing it off as your own. And that's a huge no-no in scholarly writing. And those things could really land you in academic hot water. So make sure that you are giving credit to where the information actually came from. And you're doing that on a regular basis as you're working through the paper. Um, Paragraphs not indented. I've seen quite a bit of that. So make sure that your margin is set to the left and not in the center, because when you do a center margin at the top of your paper in a Word document, everything is literally in the center of the paper and your indentations literally go away. So make sure it's indented to the left and make sure that you go in a half inch or 0.5 in terms of that. The other thing that I see oftentimes in these types of papers is they're too long. So what I'm asking for the context of this paper is 6 to 7 pages should be sufficient to get the information done. That does not include your title page. That does not include your reference page. So the body of your paper should be about 6 to 7 pages. If you turn in a paper that's 8, 9, 10 or more pages, I'm not going to even grade it. I'm just going to send it back to you because it's too long. And so, again, making sure that you're concise, sticking to what the questions are asking, not offering your opinion will definitely usually are things that will work to keep it at the proper length. Okay. All right. So run-on sentences. What is a run-on sentence? And so a run-on sentence is when you've got two complete sentences or independent clauses that are just kind of joined together. And you can see here an example of a run-on sentence here with this in this first example here with John Carell, and how there are literally two sentences that are just kind of tied together, or two independent clauses that are tied together. Now think about this being 2 or 3 lines, even longer than that, and I've seen some of those in papers as well. So you definitely don't want to do that. Comma splice occurs when you actually join two complete sentences together. So, for example, here you see using the same particular situation with Mr. Cornell here, you got this sentence being kind of stopped and then kind of a comma inserted. And that's a comma splice because you have two fairly different concepts, but you're tying them all together as one, and you don't have any connecting. You don't have any connecting words to make sure that that happens. And I'll show you what I'm talking about when I say connecting words. So there are 5 ways that you can actually fix a run-on sentence or comma splice. So add a period and add a capital letter. So again, when we look at this first example here, what they did is they just made it into 2 separate sentences. So if I grade your paper and I send you something back saying there's a comma splice, then this might be one of the ways that you want to think about fixing it. The other thing to think about too also is adding a comma and using a coordinating conjunction. And so you got for, and, nor, but, or, yet. These are what are called coordinating conjunctions. You can see the example here that made this sentence no longer a comma splice was they put comma and then but before the second part of that sentence. You can also utilize a semicolon. So oftentimes you'll see me say, take that comma out, put in a semicolon in terms of that, because that's another way of connecting what it is you're trying to do. And then the use of transitional words. So like, for example, here you got a conjunctive adverb of however. And so what ended up happening is the person put a semicolon, however, and then a comma to tie the second part of that particular sentence on. So again, this is just these are some ways that you can fix those sentences before they become problematic. And then you also can be adding that subordinating conjunction. And so here are some examples of subordinating conjunctions that you can utilize in your paper. So if you got a long sentence, you need to be able to tie it together utilizing these words and the proper punctuation as well. So if you're able to do that, then that's going to make sure that your paper is really, really done in a much better way. So thinking about it, using that, and sometimes people can put in because, remove, the example of comma is removed when the conjunction because it's added to the middle of the sentence, and then it makes it, it ties both of those pieces together. So spend a little time there if you need to. Check with the Writing Center if you've got any questions about that as well. But these are going to be really important because I see these again a lot. Again, rule of thumb is if you got a sentence that's 3 to 4 lines long in length, it's more than likely a comma splice already or run-on sentence. So make sure you utilize these particular techniques to make sure that you're not doing that. Here are again some more examples of subordinating conjunctions, adverbial conjunctions, and coordinating conjunctions. These are times when you will want to use a comma. So if you find yourself with a comma splice, you can utilize these particular conjunctions and a comma to actually help fix those. All right, so that's the grammar piece. Also making sure that your spelling is in check, the whole 9 yards. I will say one more thing as it relates to grammar in terms of your paper. So first of all, do your paper in sections. Don't try to sit down and do it all at one shot. It's just too overwhelming in terms of the amount of referencing and going back to integrate the other stuff where you got information from. So just don't do that. Do a section at a time. So the first thing that I would have you do is after you finish your section, don't proofread it at that particular point. If you've worked hard on it for several hours, don't go and proofread it to try to perfect it at that particular point. Turn off your computer, save it on your flash drive, come back again tomorrow, and then when you're ready to proofread that particular section, here's a little trick that has worked for me and has worked for students over the years. Read your paper or that section of your paper out loud. Read every single word just as you've gotten it written. You'll be able to hear your mistakes right away. The issue with trying to proofread your paper after you've just written it is that you're already anxious, you're already tired, you've been working on it all day, and you'll read it to yourself silently and you'll miss all those particular mistakes. If you come back tomorrow and you look at it and you read it out loud, you'll see every mistake that you actually made and you can fix it. Sometimes people read stuff and go like, this doesn't even make sense. What was I saying? That's why I always encourage you to write first, edit later. That should be a rule of thumb for you. Now, your papers are going to have to be meet APA guidelines, 7th edition. So first of all, that means that it needs to be double spaced, which means that there should be a gap between your paper. For those of you who have Word, you can actually go to the top of the Word diagram when you have a Word document open, and you can actually set it for an APA paper, and it will automatically set the margins, it will automatically double space, it will do all those particular things and save you a little bit of time. For those of you who don't have Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word, there is a way for you. I would say send an email to the IT people, because there is a site at Scholastic where you can actually download that whole system for free to add to your particular computer. So double spaced. It needs to be in your font that you use, that you can choose. The different style of writing needs to be Times New Roman, point 12. Please, please, please use Microsoft Word, because what happens is whenever when I get the papers, I go through them and I mark them up, just as you saw when you're this I Believe papers. And I'll show you or talk to you about what needs to be fixed or what needs to be rewritten or reworded or punctuation added, whatever the case may be. I can only do that in Word, not PDF. So if you send me a PDF document, I can't edit it, and so I can't really tell you what your mistakes are, what things only need to be done in your next draft. First of all, you're going to also need a separate title page. Don't put the name and the title of the paper and then start writing on the paper. The title page needs to be separate. There'll be an example that you can also look at as well. You want to do a brief introduction to your paper. So when you look at the instructions, you will actually be the social worker assigned to work with this particular family, individuals, and the community. And so you'll be looking at it. So when you're writing the paper, you're writing the paper from the perspective of the social worker working with this particular family. So in your introduction, what you want to do is you want to talk about what are you going to be doing in the paper. So you're going to be exploring the micro, meso, and macro perspectives that have been presented in the movie Frozen River, looking at the characters, looking at all of the things that have happened in the context of this story. And you're going to be able to identify accurately what those systems are by providing examples. So just a short paragraph to say, this is what I'm going to do, is what I'll be looking for to start. Then you want to move into the sections of your paper and do subheadings. Micro perspective, and then followed by the meso perspective and then the macro perspective. I would encourage you to answer the questions in the order that they occur and don't bounce around, because it'll make it hard to grade the paper if it doesn't follow the sequence in terms of that. So making sure that some people have actually even put the questions in their paper, and then once they have answered them sufficiently, they go back and they edit them out. So that way they know they don't miss anything in terms of answering all of the questions that are actually there. So that's a trick that you might want to think about as well too, but just remember to go back, take the questions out. In a scholarly paper, you cannot use contractions. So I won't, can't, etc. Those kind of things. The only exception would be that if you are making a quote from what a character said in the movie and they said that, then you can include that particular piece. But for your own writing, you need to write it out. So instead of don't, do not. Instead of wouldn't, would not. Instead of can't, cannot. So write them out that particular way. Otherwise, they become problematic. The other thing to keep in mind is that I'm looking at good sentence structure and paragraphs, spelling, grammar, and making sure that you have in-text citations that are done properly according to APA, and then a reference page at the end. So everything in alphabetical order, laid out just the way that the reference page is. So everything that you cite or use in your paper needs to show up on your reference page. Even if it's a video or video lecture, they still need to be added to that particular reference page so we'll know where that information comes from. So that's pretty much your APA in a nutshell. All right. So now I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then I'm going to pull up the assignment questions so you can kind of get a chance to take a look and see what your assignment's going to be like. So this is a competency assignment. It's worth 30% of your grade, so you need to do well on it. The first thing you need to know is that the first draft will be due on Sunday, October the 16th. So what I mean by drafts is that I'm going to look at them, I'm going to mark them up, and then I'll be returning them to you via email. And so then your job will be to actually go ahead and fix those as well. So let me make sure that I am sharing here. There we go. All right, so hopefully y'all can see it now because I can see it. All right, so again, 30% of your grade. And these are the competencies that we're going to be looking at, exploring in this particular paper, competency 6 and 7. And so, as you know, you're in a competency-based program, so you have to demonstrate competency or understanding of these particular concepts as you move through the program. So again, what we're going to be looking at here is systems theory analysis, and you're also going to be looking at client engagement. So as we know, we've got our watch the movie in terms of looking at that and then answering the question. So the answers to the question will be the body of your paper. So making sure that you understand that you cite it no more than 6 to 7 pages, and don't tell the movie. All right. So the first part of your paper will be your micro perspective. So this should be one of the subheadings. And so basically it kind of gives you your role. You're the parent support and outreach social worker. You've been assigned to work with this particular family and this particular community and the individuals as well. So your task is to engage, assess, and work with the chosen microsystem or individual in the mesosystem as well, the family, and then the community. So when you're looking at your micro perspective, these are 3 characters were in the movie. You get to choose whichever one you want based on what you saw in terms of that character. And then you will need to go down and answer this question. So talking about the client's individual strengths, what are they? What are the challenges and the barriers? We know that there are financial barriers that this entire family is facing, but beyond the financial barriers, what are some other things that you are seeing in terms of how this family functions and what it is they are struggling with at this particular point? What are the interviewing skills that would be important to you? So I know that there was a chapter that you read that talked about how to start an interview, how to engage, how to use various skills in terms of how you would work. That's what I'm looking for. So what information or what skills would you be using to engage your particular client is what we're asking for. There is a ton of loss, grief, and culture that's kind of permeated throughout this movie. So be able to give an example of grief, an example of loss, and cultural context when it's applicable as well. Then looking at self-determination and empowerment. How would you use these particular concepts to work with your family? So again, if I'm an audience that has no idea about systems perspective, I don't know what self-determination and empowerment are. So one thing you may want to do here is define, as the book has kind of said, self-determination is this, da 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 da, cite it. Here's how I would use it with this particular client based on these things that I saw in the movie in terms of the abilities that they have and how this might enhance that. That's what I'm looking for in terms of how are you going to actually do that. And then there's a question at the end here that talks about what would be the most challenging for you in this engagement process. So this is one of those questions where we're in the opinion of the writer, where this writer believes this is what would be the most difficult thing for me. And then you get to talk from your own perspective about what might be difficult if this was actually your client family. So again, I've got a caveat here in this section of the paper. You're going to need to provide examples. So if you've got a strength that you're talking about or a barrier, give me an example of what you saw in the movie. If you've got grief that you're talking about, give me an example of grief that you saw in the movie by saying, in a particular scene, the client said X, Y, and Z, which demonstrate a strength, a barrier, or whatever the case may actually be. And then you need to be able to cite that. And then also making sure that you're using the seventh edition, including the film, lectures, chapter readings, the whole 9 yards. Now, what I'm also going to be doing a little bit different here is that oftentimes when you're citing a movie, one of the protocols is to actually go back to the actual timestamp in the movie to say when certain things were said. I'm not requiring that you do that. I just want a simple in-text citation with what that is, and you'll have to look up what does that look like for a movie using your manual or finding it via Google. So you've done that particular situation. You picked your client, and you're talking about all of these particular things, making sure that you refer to the information that you learn from your studying, from your reading, from the video lectures, and including those things in there and then actually citing them. All right. And then once you're done with that piece, you're moving on to the meso perspective, or you're looking at the family. So there are only a couple of families to choose from here. You got Ray's family or Lila's family. And so what your job is here is to really look at what are the major conflicts and problems that this family is experiencing. Um, Provide some examples um, to make sure that we know that your answers, that you understand that. When we're talking about family strengths, what are strengths that each family actually possess? What are the things that work well? You may even want to define what a strength is. You might even want to define what a barrier is. And utilizing the examples that you saw in the movie that are actual challenges, barriers, or strengths, and just share those pieces. And here's an example of a strength that I observed in Lila's family. Ding, 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 whatever it was, cite the movie in terms of that as well. And then it's also asking you to look at two examples of beliefs or values that you observed in this film for those particular families. Whether they were healthy values or whether they were unhealthy values, what did you see? And be able to talk a little bit about that. And then give an example of how this was shared as a value for them. And so again, underneath, you still have the same instructions around making sure that you cite all of those particular information, um, pulling information from your textbook as well as the chapter readings as well. All of these things are there. So when you think about working with families, I would encourage you to go back to the particular unit that talked about working with families because there are nuggets or there are pieces of information that helps you understand how to look at the different conflicts or problems that might be happening and be able to name them. And then you want to add that to your paper as well in terms of that. And then we're going to go to the macro perspective. So now we're looking at the whole local community. We're looking at the reservation, and you're basically going to be describing a community demographic that is impacting the family. What are you seeing in the community? Um, think about what's in the surrounding. Think about the types of homes that people live in. Think about the jobs that people have. Think about the struggles that they face on a day-to-day basis. Is poverty an issue for this particular community? Are there issues around how people relate to each other? Are there community level issues? These are the things that you're wanting to really kind of speak to that you saw in the movie. So this is looking behind the scenes to really get a sense of what kind of economic challenges or factors that are actually there as well. And then in your role as the worker for the community, then you have to identify a problem or an approach for how you're going to deal with it. So think about it again. So you're now working with the entire community. So the section on macro practice and meso practice talks about how do you engage, how do you organize a community, what kind of thing needs to be done. So you're looking at a community level problem that really needs to involve the community. How are you going to go able to do that? That's what we're looking for in this section of the paper, and making sure that you do the proper citations for that piece as well. And then finally, this last section is pretty much a self-reflection. So this is getting a chance to talk about what you observe, and answering these basic four questions in terms of what would be most challenging with working with these characters, what personal values were you made aware of, in what ways do your personal and professional values intersect as it relates to working with these families, and then what actions would you need to address the challenges in becoming an effective helper in working with these families. So that's literally the assignment in a nutshell. And again, I decided I would just kind of do this video piece and share with you earlier on because I would like for you to really start earlier. I would say at least a minimum of 2 weeks before this assignment is due for you to start on it, because again, it's one of those things. If you wait till 5 days before it's due, it's not going to be well. Again, I'm grading them in drafts, so I will give you the first draft the same way that I gave you back this, I believe, and then I'll give you clear instructions in your paper that I'll email back to you, and then what you need to do to fix by the final due date. I think the final due date is sometime in December. But if you can get them done to me and done sooner, that's something that you don't have to worry about later down the road. So hopefully this will help you get a sense of what's going to be expected in terms of your paper. I will also, in addition to this particular film, I will also offer some classroom hours or hours that we can meet via Zoom as a group. I'll put some times out there. And so if you've got other questions that I didn't cover in this video, we can just kind of talk about them in real time. So again, thank you for your time and attention as we help you get through this particular assignment. So talk to you soon.